All right, we are at 4:03, so I think it is time to begin. Jenna's saying that yes, Anne Marie, or not Anne Marie, uh, Dawn Ray, get my name straight here. Dawn Ray may be joining us in a bit. So, sharing the screen. Come on. There we go. Why do we keep stopping? All right. So thank you all for joining me. Glad to have you here as always for this week's jazz session, number 13. Yes, we've been doing this for 1/4 of the year. Dwarves in the Woods, the 4 levels of learning. And I will be talking about why it's called Dwarves in the Woods. And we will be looking at that. And again, I'm going to say that this might be a short one, but this one really might be a short one. We'll see. But first, you're supposed to be good to me. I never actually saw the film, so this clip has almost no context for me. But this is, as Edith Keeler would say, time to pay for the soup, where I talk about some books that I have for sale that you might be interested in. This slide will look suspiciously like the slide from last week, thanks to the power of copy and paste. Because as always, I'm promoting Making Story Models, my book on visualization tools for writers. On the left, I am promoting for the second week in a row Uncle Roy's Computer Repairs and Used Robot Parts. Uncle Roy's was just last month named the #1 novella in analog for 2024. And I, being the opportunist that I am, and knowing that that announcement was coming, prepared an entire 25-story collection with Uncle Roy's as the title story, so that as soon as Analog finally made their announcement, I put this up for pre-order at the QR code link there. And I'm promoting it for the second week in a row because the pre-order campaign ends the 31st. So you still have a chance to get in on the pre-order and make my numbers look a little better, which will slightly boost my marketing at Amazon. And I am shameless self-promoter. Or, well, it's kind of shameless. So we're talking about Uncle Roy's this week. The title story, Uncle Roy's, is about a engineer. He retires to his wife's hometown, a little rural dairy farm area, and he's going to, as part of his retirement, he's going to open up a computer support shop. And the local high school dropout hacker owns this territory and thinks this town is not big enough for the both of them. That's the opening story, loosely inspired by places I know around Michigan, although I can't be pinned down to any of them. But that's the title story. 22 other stories, 22, do the math here. Yes, 22 other stories and 2 poems, but I call it 25 stories for short. So that's available for pre-order. All right. You know that this is what comes next. You've been here before. Tools, not rules. It is guaranteed that no one really knows what's going to work. They know what has worked before. They may have studied it, but no one knows for sure that it's going to work. And even if I say it's a rule, it's a tool. Sometimes for hyperbole, I will call something a rule. It's never a rule. Anyone trying to tell you that there is a rule beyond you must write is either naive or trying to sell you something. And this is an important lesson this week. And we're going to come back to this because this topic largely made me adopt the tools, not rules philosophy so strongly. And I'll get into that. So this week, we're going to be talking about the 4 levels of learning. And when I first set out to talk about this topic, I wanted to talk about the guy I got it from. And as I researched, I realized that I had to talk about the guy he got it from. And as I researched further, I really need to talk about who he got it from. And that is how we end up in the 15th century in Imperial Japan at no theaters. Because that's where the concept, which they call shuhari, originated. Shuhari started in Japanese no theater as a principle of effective theater presentation. And then early in the 20th century, I believe it was, an Aikido coach by the name of Ron Fox adopted this into his Aikido coaching style. Shuhari. Shu meaning to protect or obey. You follow the rules. Ha meaning to break or detach. You break the rules. And Ri, leave or transcend. You leave the rules behind. And all of this inspired this gentleman, Alistair Cockburn. Now, that's not 100% true. He independently came up with the same ideas, and then in his study discovered that Fox and no theater had been there before him, and so gave credit where credit was due. But he essentially came up with the same ideas. For those not in the software development world, Alistair Cockburn was a very, very respected software developer, and in fact was one of the founders of the agile software development movement. Now, if you're not in software development, it's like, so what is that? Why do I care? And you don't, but I'll come back to why you care. If you are in software development, you either just had a rah-rah moment or a, oh God, not this again moment. And I think both reactions are out of place, and I'll talk about that a little later. But the Agile software movement has 4 guiding principles and then a few million words written on top of those. And we're going to talk about the 4 guiding principles because we're going to come back to them later. So, first is individuals and interactions over processes and tools. You need to be talking to people and working with people, or the processes and tools don't matter. Minor grumble about my profession. This is where, out the door, most organizations that claim they're doing agile development fail. Fail from step 1. Because they do agile development by implementing a whole bunch of processes and tools that are mandatory things you must do, regardless of whether you're interacting with people or not. But the original Agile manifesto is individuals and interactions are more important. That doesn't mean processes and tools are unimportant, but if they're getting in the way of individuals and interactions, there's a problem. Similarly, working software is more important than comprehensive documentation. Any software developer has run into cases where the docs say one thing and the code says another, and it's the code that you ship. You don't send the users documentation. If you did, they wouldn't know how to read it. So if you let the documentation process get in the way of working software, you have failed. Their third one, customer collaboration over contract negotiation. This is really hard in big organizations. It is really super hard because contracts are how things get decided when things go wrong. When you disagree about how to proceed, when you disagree about who owes whom what. So contracts are so important to the business organization, but they can get in the way of talking to customers. And if you don't talk to customers, you don't really know what they want. I worked in one organization. Okay, I will say this about the corporation I work for, and I'm going to name them by name. Eaton Corporation, which works in power distribution of all sorts around the world. I constantly tell my coworkers that this is the least screwed up place I have ever worked by a significant factor. And they all think I'm joking. And I'm not, because they get a lot closer to these principles than any place else I've ever worked in my career since 1981. My God, has it been that long? But I worked in one organization where, in order for me to know what the user needed, I had to ask my project manager. He had to ask a contract manager. The contract manager had to talk to the liaison. The liaison had to talk to their liaison. Their liaison had to talk to their project manager. Their project manager had to talk to the team and then find a person on the team to talk to. You all remember the game of telegraph from kindergarten. How is any truth going to come through that many layers? And the answer is it won't. But what happens is even worse, because somewhere in the middle of those layers, somebody shortcuts because they know better. Notice they have the air quotes. They know better. And so I never get to hear what the user wants. I get to hear what their manager's manager thinks they want. Or sometimes even it gets shortcut on my end. That one of my managers just says, oh, well, this is what they need. Trust me, just go do this. There's no collaboration happening. And the agile movement says, wait a minute, if you're not talking to real customers who are doing the real work, you're not going to build the right thing. And the last one, responding to change over following a plan, is also really hard from a business point of view because plans are how you allocate resources, how you schedule deliveries, how you coordinate with other groups, and so on. Businesses depend upon plans as their lifeblood. But when something happens that's not in the plan, you can't keep blindly following the plan. If you keep blindly following the plan, you are ignoring something that you've learned, something that's important to success. My friend Steve Poling often quotes a general, I think it was Eisenhower, who said, plans are useless, planning is essential. The idea being that planning makes you think through the problems ahead of time so you understand them better. Plans are pretending that you knew all the answers when you did the planning, and you didn't. So agile software development is about recognizing that your plans will be wrong and planning to accommodate those changes. And again, what does this have to do with writing? Well, we'll come back to that. Now, as I said, Coburn independently came up with what is essentially Shuhari. He called it the 3 levels of listening: following, detaching, and fluent. And I got to tell you, I never heard of Shuhari literally until last week as I was putting the slide deck together. I heard of Coburn's following, detaching, and fluent, and I could never, ever, ever keep them straight until I came up with my own metaphor. And my metaphor is Tolkien's Dwarves and a Hobbit in the woods from the book The Hobbit. And if I'm spoiling a book for you that's 90 years old almost, I'm sorry, but you should have read it a long time ago. My personal opinion, it being, of course, one of my favorites. But I find it easier to remember these levels by talking about those dwarves who were lost in the woods and had to get through. It was the most important thing they could do at this moment, is get through those woods, because there's important things happening on the other side, but there's all sorts of problems along the way. There are spiders in those woods that will drink your blood. And so I find it easier to keep track of this with a travel metaphor with the dwarves in the woods. And I also added a vital level that both the No Theater and Coburn missed. That's, I call it level 0, wandering. You're lost in the woods. You've got no idea what to do. You are just wandering. If you see a stream, you drink from it because you're thirsty and you hope it's not poison. If you see a mushroom, you eat it because you're hungry and you hope it's not toxic. If you see lights, you follow them because lights must be going somewhere interesting, right? You are hopelessly lost, desperate for any solution. This comes before shoe. This comes before whatever was the first one in Coburn's levels. Remember, I've already lost his levels. Wandering is where you are when you know you want to get somewhere and you have no possible way to get there other than sheer dumb luck. And then we get to our first formal level discussed by Coburn and covered in Shuhari, which I, keeping the travel metaphor, call following. Your friendly neighborhood wizard puts you on a path and says, follow this path. Don't leave this path. Here is a list of the streams you can drink from. Here is the list of the mushrooms you can eat. Do not eat any of the deer. That will get you in trouble. Do not leave this path. Just trust me and follow it, and you will come out the other side. And if you've read The Hobbit, you know how well that worked. Because these paths can be long. And if you don't have deep understanding, you're not sure how they work. And you get these distractions that, hey, that deer just jumped through and that's food. And you're going to chase the deer and pretty soon you've lost the path. Or you see the lights of the elves and you chase after them and you've lost the path. Or one of your member falls into one of the streams you're not supposed to touch and that stream puts him to sleep. There are lots of ways you can fall off the path and you're back to wandering. Or even if you follow it, it might not go where you need to go. But following sure sounds like a better approach than wandering, if you can do it. If you don't fall off the path, because if you fall off, you're back to wandering. So there's our level 1. You have a path to follow. Level 2, come on, there we go, is navigating. You have a map to paths. You can choose the right path. You can look at your goals and come up with a path to get you somewhere. Level 2 gives you a lot more choices to respond to exactly what your goals are. So level 2, so much better than level 1. It's still not perfect. I can point to places on that map where you can't get to them. There's no paths there. But level 2 feels really good. You are experienced at this. Beyond that is level 3, trailblazing. You've been in these woods for what feels like a career, maybe feels like a lifetime. You know the woods. You mark the trails. You find the trails through. You are the person who just is the spirit of the woods. So we have our wandering, following, navigating, and trailblazing as our levels. So the question you need to ask yourself is, what level are you at? And it's not always an easy question to answer. It really isn't. But I've come up with some, let's call them signs of what level you're probably at or possibly at. That's not saying you can't see these signs happen at other levels, but these are some pretty good signs of what level you're at. Level 0, wandering, you'll kind of know. You don't know where to start. You're spinning your wheels trying. You start a lot of things and never finish them. You throw them away because it just didn't feel like you were getting anywhere. Or if you do some finished things, you can't really even explain how you did. You just kind of got lucky. You certainly don't know how to do it again. Wandering, you do feel lost. If you're feeling like you don't know what to do and you're just trying shit, that's wandering. Now, some of the signs that you're at level 1 following, one is you've finished some projects. They're kind of similar in a lot of ways, but you've finished some projects and you know how you finished them. You know the steps you went through. You can maybe explain them. Now, with a big caveat. One of my very frequent paths is pantsing, discovery writing. And it is harder than hell to explain how to pants. I can demonstrate it. I can coach and encourage it. We've got a session coming up later in the year where I talk about how to pants. But it's really hard for me to explain because so much of it is I just did what came next. But for the most part, you're following when you can explain how you got to the end point. And very likely you've got a book or a coach or a video or something that you're just constantly the biggest fan of. You're promoting it to people. You're telling people, here's how I did this. Here's where I learned it. And you know the one true path. Okay, that last one, I struck through it. I never want to hear you know the one true path. I never, and we'll talk about that coming up. I never want to hear you know the one true path. But if you think you know the one true path, and I've seen this happen, you're at following. You are not any better than following if you think there's one true path. There isn't. Tools, not rules. How to know when you're at level 2. You've finished a bunch of projects and they're different in lots of ways. And you can explain, for the most part, how each one was different, what you did different to make it happen. You don't have a single book or video or coach. You've got a lot, and you can explain what's different between them. You can talk about the different methods you tried and why you chose this one over that one. You are really into how you did it, not just that you did it. Unfortunately, in my experience, this is also the level where imposter syndrome kicks in. It might kick in at level 1 following, because you feel like your one true path doesn't always work, and why isn't it working? It won't kick in at wandering because imposter syndrome. Remember, true imposter syndrome is not, I doubt that I can do this. True imposter syndrome is, oh hell, I did this. How did I do this? I faked it. I didn't really do this. I faked it. And everybody's going to figure it out. Or even deeper, everybody already knows. And you're just waiting for them to kick you out of the club because you don't really belong here. I find that imposter syndrome generally hits hardest at level 2 because at level 2, one of the things you know among the many paths is all the things you don't know. And you're sure that you're missing one of the things you don't know, and that's what makes you the imposter. And everybody but you knows that you don't know it. So I think imposter syndrome is a good hint that you're at level 2. Level 3, when you're at the trailblazing level, you pretty much finish any project you choose. Now, you might get lazy or tied up and you don't finish for time reasons, but there's no project you can't tackle if you set your mind to it. You don't worry anymore about how, you just do. You have the confidence to do. My book that's right now in the Writers of the Future Epic e-bundle, A Fine and Dangerous Season, was inspired by the prompts from FireCon for Firetober from Jenna and Donray, where every day they posted a prompt. Okay, they cheated and I cheated. They posted the whole month at once so I could sneak ahead. But every day they posted a prompt for a flash fiction, and I turned it into a short story and eventually turned it into a chapter of a novel. And around day 5 or 6, when I started to realize that these completely separate short stories weren't completely separate, that they could all be one chapter of a novel, I came up with this on a drive home from a library reading group where they had discussed my book. So I had a 3-hour drive home, and I spent that time dictating sections of what would become that book. And all of a sudden, I reach a point where I say, this could all be one story. And over the span of 5 minutes driving down the road, I had that would be so cool. But can I do that? How would I do that? But it would be so cool. It'd only be cool if I pulled it off. Can I do that? Of course I can do it. I am the pants master. There was maybe 2 minutes of doubt, and then I just did it. And I pulled it off without doubts from that point forward. You just confidently do. You're not blocked. Whatever trouble you find yourself in, there is a way out. You just have to find it. And you may even find yourself teaching methods to other people, and we'll talk about that more. I am tempted to say you'll know when you're level 3, but I'm not sure you will. And I've got a very specific reason for saying that, and we'll talk about that in a little bit here. So those are ways to guess which level you're at, but they're also a lie to us to this degree. Because you don't have one level, you have levels. You have levels for each of the different major areas of producing a book. Writing is only one of the areas. Then you have to edit and choose how much to edit. Somebody has to illustrate your cover, presumably. Somebody has to art design that cover. That's a different skill set. To a degree, art design and art direction is to illustration as editing is to writing. Art design is having the vision that the illustration has to fill, which is not quite the same as actually creating the illustration, though there can be overlap. Formatting the book for publishing, publishing itself and marketing, all these wonderful things that I wanted to mention that Anne-Marie is now studying in her Master's of Publishing program from Western Colorado University under Kevin J. Anderson, and she's not here for me to brag on her. These are all different areas, so you will have levels in each of them that are different. And so I can be honest and straightforward here with you because I never lie to my students. I will tell you what I think based on those grids, what I think my levels are, so you know where not to come to me for instruction. The big goose egg at illustration. Illustration, I am a wanderer. I have occasionally somehow magically produced pictures that people can recognize what I drew. I can't explain how. I actually wrote a very long, like 20 chapter graphic novel slash programming book where I did all the art with simple stick figures, and the stick figures very well communicated the points I was trying to make in a humorous fashion that delighted 300 Twitter users at the time. So I would say I illustrated, but I really don't have skills. I just stumbled into it. So I'm going to put my illustration at 1. My art is at 0. My art design, I'm going to put at 1 because I have had some consultation with Lazarus Chernick, one of the Writers of the Future or Illustrators of the Future judges, and the husband of Echo Chernick, the coordinating judge of Illustrators of the Future. And Lazarus has given me some basic instructions on good cover design and layout that are better than anything I knew before I talked to him. So he has given me a path to follow, which won't work sometimes, but it's better than wandering. So I'm going to give myself a 1 there. I'm also honestly, even though I've been doing this now 15 bloody years and longer, when you look at writing across my whole career, I feel like I'm only a 1 at editing. I don't have a lot of tools. I read the manuscript, and if something feels wrong to me, I fix it. It's a step above wandering, but it's not a big step. So I'm going to put myself at 1 for editing. Now for these others, formatting, publishing, and marketing, I am going to say that by the grid I showed, I'm a 1 at every one of them. I don't have lots of tools, lots of choices of how I format or how I publish. I really follow one process, although it has evolved over the years, but I essentially follow one process for formatting and one process for publishing. And beyond that, I'm following processes that most people, including Anne-Marie's Masters in Publishing program, will look down their noses at, because I pretty much do it with Word. And they talk about how there are such better tools out there and Word is so hard. And it's like, yeah, but I've been using Word since 1987. I know my way around Word. I'm going to use Word. And so I really only have one way, and it is a way that is niche. I don't have a lot of choices, but I'm tempted to call myself kind of a 2 on formatting and publishing. Because, man, the books I've been producing lately are so much better than the ones I used to produce. I feel like I am in the vicinity of 2 quality, even if I only have one methods. So I have, in fact, a couple of sessions planned where I'm going to teach how did you make that cover? How did you make that book? How did you publish that book? But I'm going to be very specifically showing you my way, and I want you aware that there are plenty of other ways. This is just a tool among many. But I feel like I'm getting too quality. So I am kind of saying, yeah, I'm there. And marketing. Again, I've got one path, but just again, we don't keep secrets here. Since all of this started, since I started the jazz sessions, since I started my new brand, since I started doing a release every month, all at the start of May, I have currently earned something above $500 by the end of the month. With the pre-orders, I will probably cross the $600 line, especially if you all go out and pre-order Uncle Roy. If I compare that to my past year before I put this effort out there, that's more than I made in the past year. And I'm doing it in 3 months. So I feel like I am crossing a line on marketing. But let's go back to that top one, the 3. I really had to convince myself to put that 3 down there. It's a hard thing for me to accept that I could be at 3 in the writing. And yet I am. I have to tell myself I am, but I am. Again, I wrote an entire novel and published it to my blog and my newsletter in 32 days, a chapter a day in response to prompts with no idea where it was going. And I confidently know that aside from time and energy, I can do it again. I am confident now I can solve any problem I run into in a story. I am at a point where instead of saying, can I do this? Or even how I do this, it's just do this. And that is why, going back to here, I felt uncomfortable putting you'll know as the last entry of Trailblazing because I am getting 3 results. It feels weird to put myself into that category with my mentors like Dean and Chris, like Kevin and Rebecca, like James Owen. It feels very weird to say, yes, I'm at that level, at least as far as the writing goes. But looking at my results, I'm at a 3. There are other areas beyond these, of course. These are just the big ones in publishing. And so you'll want to assess yourself because that will also help you figure out, first of all, what your goals are. Because if your goal is traditional publishing, you don't need to be above a 1 for most of these things because the publisher is going to do it. All you need to do is be skilled enough to recognize if they're doing it well. But if your goal is you want to be self-publishing, then you better learn the formatting. You better at least be a 1 and be working on a 2. You better learn the publishing. You better learn the marketing. I am so happy that I've made $600 in the past 3 months. I also know that that ain't close to the potential that a lot of people have. I still got a long way to go on that. But comparatively, it's a big step forward. So you need to be thinking about where you need to improve depending on your goals. If your goal is just write great stuff and try to sell it to somebody, then you can concentrate on the writing and the editing. All right. Let's talk about the different levels now in a little more detail. Let's talk about what it's like to be at level 0. And the short summary is it sucks. We lose 90% of the would-be writers at level 0. That they just aren't going to really succeed. Some people will say we lose 99%. A rule of thumb used to be 90% of people who say they want to be a writer never write, and 90% of those who are left never finish. So that's 99%. So it could very well be argued that 99% of everybody are stuck at level 0 and will never get out because it is frustrating, discouraging. You just want somebody to tell you what to do. Just tell me what to do and I'll do it. This can make you really gullible and prone to falling for smooth promises from people who are going to solve all your problems for you if you just hand them over your bank balance. Stop. If you're at level 0, it's not the end of the world. We all were level 0 at one point. It is survivable. You can survive it. There's just a few things you might do to help yourself tread water at level 0 until you can get to level 1. One is you got to talk to lots of writers because that will help you understand that level 0 is a normal step in the path, and you will get past it. And you try lots of things. When you talk to people, hear what they're doing and trying it, you are looking for your level 1, which might not be the be all end all, but it gets you off the basic wandering and onto a path. And when in doubt, if you remember The Hobbit, I give apologies to those who didn't read it because I'm spoiling a very small but beautiful scene. When in doubt, climb a tree. When they were really, really, really hopelessly lost, Bilbo the Hobbit, who had to get them out of all the sticky situations because big, strong dwarves can't solve problems, they had him climb a tree all the way to the top and look around. And what he saw from up there was the potential of the woods. He saw the beautiful butterflies. He saw the sunshine. He saw so much. Now, he also missed the fact that they were a lot closer there than they realized. But climbing the tree, looking around, looking at the world around you, separate from this path you're trying to follow, can give you the inspiration to say, yeah, I want to do that. I really do. I don't want to give up. Now, I also have to say, Dave is re-entering the room. I also have to say, and this is important, it's okay to walk away at level 0. It really is. Maybe your passion really isn't there. You have the idea, the fancy that you'd like to write, but you don't have it enough to struggle through the levels. And that's okay. Nobody says you have to do this. Those of us who are writing and want to write sometimes forget that our passion is beyond normal. Hang out with a bunch of writers at a convention, and you'll hear people say things like, scratch a reader and you'll find a writer. And it's just not true. Not everybody wants to write, and some who fantasize about writing don't want to do the work. And for our purposes, we need a hell of a lot more readers than we need writers. Not that I don't love you all and want you writing, but I need 100 readers for every one of you. We need all those non-writers out there. So the idea that somebody has failed if they walk away is wrong. It means this wasn't that important to them. I forget who first gave this advice. I've heard it through several paths now, but something to the effect of, if you can give up on writing, you should. Because it's hard, there's no guarantees, it can be really discouraging. You don't need that. If you would be just as happy becoming a great barbecue grill expert, then go do that. You should keep working on writing if it's the only thing you can do, or not the only thing, but the most important thing. If it's so important to you that you have to do it even though it's hard. And I don't want to see anybody as a failure if they look at level 0 and say, this just isn't for me. Now, I may be sad, because sometimes what they're really saying is, I want this, but I don't know where to go and I'm discouraged. I have run into some of those at conventions where it takes a long time before they open up and admit how important it is to them. Them I feel sad for. If they walk away, it's walking away from something they really wanted and just didn't believe they could do it, or just were too tired. That makes me sad. But people who decide that they don't want it enough and they're happy to just go read and go do something else, happy for them. So there's our life at level 0. Our life at level 1 is generally better than wandering. It does feel safe. It's like, okay, I know what to do next. But there's a few gotchas on that safety. One, as I mentioned, is if the path is going to the wrong place, then it's not helping you. If the path is going to someplace other than where you need to go for the stories you want to write, it's not really safe. It's creating work you don't need to do and not getting you on the work you do. Related to that, the path can be really long. And going back to the Dwarves in the Woods, again, they had a really long path and they left it. And now you're back to wandering. So this path can feel safe, but sometimes lead you astray. And also, sometimes it is just the wrong path for you. There will be another one that would be better for you. So that safety can sometimes feel safe when you're starting out, but as you keep following the path, you keep starting to have doubts. So there's a couple of things you need to do there. You need to practice and explore so you can find limits of your path. And also you need to start thinking of, there might be other paths. You really need to be aware of hubris, and you really need to be aware of the one true path mentality, which is so common. I have seen people vehemently say that if you're not outlining, you're not writing. And fortunately for them, it is impossible to kick somebody in the ass across the internet, because that ain't how I write, unless it is, because I do have many paths. I have seen people argue nobody's really pantsing. They're actually outlining. They just don't know it. It's like, are you in my head? No, 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 no. I had one, and we'll talk about this one again on the next slide. I had one who confidently told a very large writing group that the one and only true path was to do exactly what Brandon Sanderson teaches in his writing classes. And if you told him, no, that is a path, he proceeded to heap half an hour or more of scorn upon me in the social media group before he finally got disgusted with himself and deleted all of his posts. Because clearly, he was taught by Brandon Sanderson. He had the one true path. What did I know compared to Brandon? The one true path mentality is a sign of an amateur. And I don't care how many sales you've made. If you have one true path mentality, you are an amateur. These are the people for whom I adopted the phrase tools, not rules. These are the ones who are trying to tell you either do this or you're wrong. It's like, no, try this. And if it doesn't work, try something else. So life at level 1 has some good things going for it. It is a good starting point, but it's only level 1. Do not delude yourself that you're done. Level 2, now you have choices. It's very liberating, very. You have any number of ways to get to any number of places. So now you can start exploring these paths, practice them, try things out, figure out new ways of doing things because they might be helpful later. So find the limits of the paths you know and find how new paths work. And related to that, knowing when to experiment and when not. There are times when experimenting is just not a good idea right now. For me, the biggest answer to that is, what's my deadline? I don't have one? Okay. Have I been paid for this work? Does somebody expect something specific? No. Then experiment all you want. But if I have deadlines or obligations or collaborators, because when you're collaborating, you may have to be a little more rigid in your process. Maybe that's not the time to experiment. But otherwise, challenge yourself. Try new things. You'll never get better at them unless you challenge yourself. I first heard this lesson from Dean Wesley Smith. I've heard it from others. If there is something you're not good at writing, write that and write it again and write it again and keep writing it until you can no longer say you're not good at that. And then look for the next thing you're not good at. Because the only way you're going to get better is by practicing. You're not going to get better by saying, well, I guess I won't do that then. Being a non-military person with moderate exposure to martial arts, I taught self-defense for about a decade, and I know some fencing. And so I've got moderate exposure to self-defense, but I'm really not good at fight scenes. So you better believe I look for opportunities to write fight scenes, and my fight scenes today are significantly better than my fight scenes 5 years ago because I've gone out of my way to write them. And keep looking for these other paths, looking for ways that you can keep expanding your map of paths. But going back to Mr. I have the one true path, what I didn't do was come back at him with, do you know who I am? I think that's a toxic attitude almost as bad as the one true path. Do you know who I am? Guess what? No, I am not Brandon Sanderson with the #1 Kickstarter of all time. On the other hand, Mr. One True Path, you do not have an Amazon page. You do not have anything published. I have, at that time, over 50 items on my Amazon page. I think it's higher than that yet. I had, for one whole month on Amazon, I had the #1 science fiction ebook across all Amazon for a month. I do know what I'm talking about. But pulling that do you know who I am crap, first of all, makes me the jerk. And second of all, doesn't change his mind. Nothing's going to change his mind except experience. And me trying to tell him that he's wrong and he's hurting people, because one true path can hurt people. He's not going to believe it. Arguing with him isn't going to change anything. I can present the argument of how there are other paths so that people watching the conversation, and we're going to come back to that point, people watching the conversation are aware that there's more to it than the one person is laying out. But I don't have to convince him. I don't have to prove him wrong. I have to show the other options. So this is your life at level 2. Life at level 3 really only has one process. What are my goals? What do I have to work with? What are my limits? Okay, what are the obvious answers? Do those. Where am I left with? Okay, how am I going to get to where I'm going? Try that. Okay, I got some gaps still. Some repeat, 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 repeat. That's the only real process at that level, is just know what you need to do, try to do it using things you know and figuring out things you don't know until you get where you're going. You just have this process. And this process really is the confidence of having lived in these woods for an entire career or longer. But you also have to respect the levels. Going back to Mr. One True Path, he knows that Mr. One True Path at his level 1, you can't just shake the spear at him and make him a level 3. You can't even shake the spear and make him a level 2. It is a necessary step in his maturation from level 0 that he go through level 1. Some people go through it fast. Some people go through it slow. Some never get out of it. At level 3, you've seen it all, and you understand that, yes, you expose him to the possibilities, but he's going to get out of level 1 when he gets himself out of level 1. And people who are at level 2 may start to suspect that level 3 is out there and they want to get there. And you can help them, but you can't climb the levels for them. Level 3 recognizes that this process, Shu-Ha-Ri, is absolutely a necessary process you can't skip. And you also at level 3 learn to listen, because the conversations going on, you might be able to help. And this is why Coburn in particularly talked about not the 3 levels of learning. He talked about the 3 levels of listening. Because what Coburn identified that was new to this was the effect of the levels on conversations and how those conversations are perceived by others. And I put this into a grid to guide us through. So across the top, we have different levels of a conversation. So we have a 0 level, where we have a couple of wanderers talking, or a 1 level, a couple of following, or 2, a couple of navigating, 3, a couple of trailblazing. And then you have down the side, who is listening to that conversation? So if you have a wanderer listening to 2 wanderers, about all that you can do is just commiserate. We're all lost. We're lost together. I guess that's more comfortable than being lost alone. When a wanderer listens to a couple of following speakers, that sounds a lot better than wandering. That sounds like, hey, I should be trying that. That is how you may take your step from 0 into 1. But 2 things can happen with that. One is the things they're talking about might not make sense because every path has got its own verbiage, its own terminology, its own necessary steps. If you're a wanderer, you might not appreciate those. So you might just be confused, or you can put too much trust in, because what you're hearing, even if they're not saying it, what you're hearing is the one true path. And so that's what you must do. Now, for the most part, one true path is better than no path at all. So stepping into one with a one true path is still stepping up from wandering. You just need to be able to get beyond that. Now, if you hear a wanderer, have a wanderer listening to 2 navigators, it's better, I think, than listening to 2 speakers, because you hear that there are many ways of doing this. You hear that there is the beat sheet. You hear that there is 3-act. You hear that there is Campbell and the hero's journey. You hear all these possibilities. So you know that there's lots of things out there you might study, which might give you choice overload. When you have too many choices, sometimes it can be intimidating. You really want just somebody to give you one, just one, because I don't know which one to choose. And the worst part is a wanderer listening to 2 trailblazers talking, because that path, that universal path, kind of sounds a lot like wandering, because essentially it is. It is wandering with decades of experience under your belt so that you can wander and not be lost. So listening to trailblazers talking to each other doesn't give you anything at all to work on. We'll come back to what happens, though, when the trailblazers listening to you, because they may have something to help there. So now we have a follower listening to 2 wanderers. Follower might say, hey, here, you sound like this could help you. Why don't you try this? Again, you can't make the step for them. You can show them the step. You can't make the step for them. But showing them a step, that's how you got there. Somebody showed you at some point. On the other hand, you are still prone to the one true path mentality if you're not careful. So you may listen to those wanderers and demand you must follow Brandon's lessons, or else you will always, 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 always fail. That guy was a jerk. But I was polite. So listening to them, try to avoid one true path mentality, because you don't have the true path. You have a path. Similarly, when followers listen to followers, they can argue because you're on the wrong path. Mine is the right path. You're on the wrong path. Again, you can't pants, you must outline, or you will fail. Well, no, my experience tells me otherwise. Surprisingly, because I have never heard this, never, ever, ever. But I have a friend who tells me that in his writing circles, he is constantly told he cannot outline, he must pants. He has no choice. If he wants to succeed, he must pants. That is just as wrong. You must have 3-act structure. No. You must have 4-act. You must have 5-act. You must have hero's journey. You must have save the cat. No, 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 no. And that's what you'll hear in followers talking to followers sometimes, is just arguing over the right path. When a follower listens to a navigator's conversation, that's when, if the ears are open, you start realizing there are other paths you could follow and maybe you should learn them. Or you can reflexively shut your ears and tell them that's wrong. And when the trailblazers are doing what sounds a lot like wandering, you can tell them what's wrong. Because you, Mr. Amazon page doesn't exist, know better than all these published writers because you had a lesson taught to you. But I'm not bitter. I'm amused. Now, when you have a navigator listening to wanderers, like the follower listening to wanderers, you can give them paths, but you can give them a helpful path. Hearing what they're talking about, you can look at the many paths available and say, what about if you tried this? Okay, how about this? And when you find one that seems to help them, you can say, okay, let me show you how I did that. When you're listening to followers talking, you can say, yes, that is a path. Here are some others, and here's why, and here's examples. So maybe you can break them out of that one true path mentality. Navigators talking navigators is wonderful because you all share paths back and forth. You all point out ideas. You point out coaches and sources. You talk about examples. You talk about what worked and listen to what worked. Navigators talking to navigators is a wonderful place to be. Navigator listening to the trailblazers, you start to aspire to say, oh, wow, I would have never thought of that. And it's not actually written down anywhere. They just figured it out. Am I ready to start figuring out for myself? Now, when you're a trailblazer listening to wanderers or listening to followers, first thing you need to do is listen so you know where they're at, because you can put them onto paths. If they'll listen to you, you cannot take the steps for them again, but you can put them onto paths. And you've been around long enough that you're even better than the navigator at diagnosing where they're at and what path might help. So you could be helpful there. When you're listening to navigators, you're a fount of other paths that they may never have heard of before. So you can be the person who's sharing. And when you're talking to your trailblazing speakers, your fellow trailblazers, you just learn from each other all the time. You have heard mention, certainly from me, probably from others, of the Superstars writing seminars, which is an absolutely wonderful writing workshop every February, more focused on the business side than the craft side, although they have a little bit of craft content. And it's a wonderful thing that any year I can afford the time off and the travel costs, I will go. But it's an expense. We know what travel's like these days. But I wish I could go back in time and go to the early ones, because the early superstars were just the instructors meeting with each other. These were long-term writers who had known each other for a long time, and they decided that once in a while they ought to get together and compare notes. That was trailblazers talking to trailblazers. Superstars today, that still happens, but there's an awful lot of trailblazers talking to navigators and followers. Probably not wanderers, because they're not really ready for superstars, and it's a lot of money to spend when you're not ready. But it's also navigators talking to followers. There's lots of shared learning going on there, but it's not that core meeting of the minds that I would just love to be a fly on the wall for. But learning from each other is a big part of it. So now I want to go back to Alistair Cockburn, where we started out, kind of, if we ignore the no theater and the Aikido, and go back and talk about his definition, not his, it was the whole group's definition of agile development. Individuals and interactions, working software, collaboration, responding to change. That's trailblazing. What they were really trying to say is we need to aim for trailblazing in our software development. We need to aim for people who can solve the problems without having to have rigid processes and rigid rules to solve within. Even if we need the rules, the most important thing is we solve the processes, or we solve the problems regardless of the processes. There was research to back this up. And these are scary numbers if you think you're not a trailblazer, but they're not scary because your company won't pay for trailblazers. A side note into the software world. A good programmer is reliably shown to be 10 times as productive as a beginner programmer, but they probably only cost about 3 times as much. An excellent programmer is about 10 times as productive as a good programmer and probably only costs 3 times as much. So if your company is willing to pay for those trailblazers, the net return on investment is significantly better. But bean counters and HR departments don't worry about that. So those of us who are average will still find work. They're not going to let us go in favor of the excellent because they just don't see that equation. But honestly, that's what it comes down to is trailblazers can do things largely because they've let go of doubt and worry and just say, I've done stuff before, I'll do stuff again, at a level that navigators can aspire to, but they usually don't hit. And navigators can solve problems that followers aren't going to solve because the processes aren't right. So honestly, they were building a manifesto for we're going to be encouraging trailblazing software. And I'm going to be encouraging trailblazing writing. But you don't have to be there today. You don't have to be there tomorrow. What I do want is you planning your path forward through the levels. So I was doing my research on Coburn to put these slides together, and I discovered that he had a new edition of the book that I read his stuff in before. And his new edition, he added something else. This is not a level 4. Kokoro, which means heart, is not a level 4. It's what you do as a level 3, as a re. It is something you do that helps you be a proper re, helps you stay at that level, keep yourself and your community focused. When you figure something out, make sure you're documenting it so you can share it with other people, so you can learn from them and they can learn from you. And you learn by teaching. Now, this is not a new thing. Most every discipline at this point is aware that you learn a lot by teaching things to people. So you can learn by teaching, but at the re level with Kokoro, that's part of your obligation. You have developed from the community. You have this pay it forward obligation that says, hey, I am going to share this because people shared with me. It is part of my place in the community. It is essentially, I am not just a level 3. I am a map maker. I produce things, whether it's documents or lectures or just counseling sessions. I produce things to help everyone climb to higher levels or aspire to higher levels. You are not just a trailblazer, you are a cartographer. Or you're teaching jazz sessions, Dwarves in the Woods. And this is part of why this hit me so hard when I read the Kokoro. It's like, this is part of what I have this obligation to do. Yes, I love having the audience. I also am at a point where I have the responsibility to pay it forward that my mentors have all taught. This is where I am at, is I am teaching you because it is my place at the level 3 that I am to add to the levels and hopefully push you all to the levels that you are best at, because people help me help lift me up. I'm now here to help lift you up. So questions on the levels. I see we have one in the chat, but I think we already caught that one.
I have a comment.
All right.
Sometimes, and I don't think we talk about this, your expertise in one area can transfer to other areas. And I have an anecdotal story from my recent mentoring. Martin knows I've been mentoring someone through the writing process or
Well,
publishing process recently. And we're having this whole discussion, and he's like, comes to me, he goes, "What should I be formatting my book in?" And I was like, that's a really complicated question. But because I know this person and I know his history, I looked at him and said, InDesign, which I would not say to 99 out of 100 people. But because I know his background, which is in tech and animation, and I know that he knows the Adobe suite so well, I would recommend InDesign because I know that he could open that up and do all the things he needs to do tomorrow.
hmm
But
a better path for him
yeah,
because you are out there navigating potentially almost a trailblazing in that area. And so, therefore, you understand the options. You
yeah.
understand that, you understand he needs a path. He just needs a follower level, but the wrong one will be wrong.
Right? Because people were telling him Scrivener and Vellum and this and this and this, like 100 things. And I was like, but you don't know any of those programs and you don't have the time to learn them on the scale, on the path that you want to take, the timetable that you set. But you do know this program. You just
hmm
don't realize that this is the program that can do that for you. And sometimes I think our level threes and twos can look at us and go, you're totally on the right path. You're just using the wrong tool.
hmm and he was faced with, as I mentioned on the one slide, choice overload.
Mm.
People are giving him all these choices without any idea of how to choose one, or even worse, and this can be tricky. They were giving him reasons to choose, but he didn't know how to answer those questions.
I don't think anyone asked him the questions.
But you just said, take this path. You were Gandalf. You put him on a path, and as long as he stays on it, he will get to the other side of the woods. He will get to the other side of the woods way too far south of the mountain. Why Gandalf couldn't have got them on a better path, that's a separate question. But he will get through because you knew what he was capable of following.
And sometimes I think that's a thing we need to explore more is, are we actually listening to the people that we're, which is goes back to your listener part, but it,
Mm-hmm.
are we actually asking them the questions? Because I think nobody asked him what he knew.
Mm-hmm.
And knowledge is transferable between fields. We just don't always realize it.
Mm-hmm. And I think ideally, part of what makes a level three is you understand you have to ask. A level two presents choices. A level three tries to understand and guide. And that's a subtle distinction. Other questions?
Yeah, I was gonna say something too, just a matter of like, a lot of times when you talk about levels, people talk about experience, but I think there's also like a maturity thing that goes along with it too. I find myself firmly planted level zero all day. And I might be 42 years old and, been traipsing around the world doing all kinds of different things. And I have in the army, sphere of writing, I have a bunch of things like published professionally, in Army aviation and those things in my professional career, when it comes to like leadership articles and the things that I've done in the organizations that I have led. And people know that I kind of started about 2 years ago writing in the fictional worlds. And so automatically people start thinking that I'm some, wizard when it comes to writing. And so I know I'm firmly planted in zero. And people come to me asking me for advice. And I'm like, hold the phone, like, and I bring them to things like this and I show them all the other groups that I'm a part of. And I'm not the one to be giving advice. I'll help them on the professional side of things. But I definitely like I'm terrified of pushing someone or giving them bad advice, putting them in the wrong direction. And so just once again, as always, thank you so much because this helps, and maybe that's just me being humble a little bit, but like, one day all the stuff will click together, as long as you keep pushing. But I I don't think that anybody should ever like you got to be careful who you get advice from. I guess that's kind of what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, I also think you're farther ahead than you realize that you'll cross a line and I'll take off. This is just my experience that writers who start later have a tendency to pick up faster because you've got all this other experience you've built up in life. And especially you've got other writing experience. It's not fiction writing, but you can put words together to make a point. That's a huge advantage. You'll be putting different words together in different points, but you've got your basic communications and grammar and everything down. So that
Right.
when it clicks for what you're trying to say, I think you'll take off quickly. One of my absolute favorite writers, Jack McDevitt, biggest inspiration on my writing of anybody, and that's a pretty high list. He didn't really start writing fiction successfully until he was 47. He'd had other careers. He was in customs, he was in teaching, he was in lots of things, but he'd always had the urge to write. When he started at 47, he took off. And he was getting Nebula nominations a few years later because he had all this other learning in life that he brought to bear, especially with military having taught you planning and goal seeking and all these other things about leadership. When it clicks, I expect to see you leap.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I hope so. Thank you.
Yeah.
I have
All
one
right.
other comment, Martin, on because you said there's the "Do you know who I am" thing. There's the opposite of that. Assume everybody's somebody.
Mm-hmm.
I see a lot of people get in trouble because if they meet someone and they have no idea who they are, I've watched writers be rude to that person.
Mm-hmm.
And it was somebody who had a lot of connections, or it was a publisher, or it was an editor, or it was, and people have long memories.
Mm-hmm.
So there's the never do the do you know who I am, but there's also know who people are or assume everybody's important.
Yeah. Just be decent to all of them.
Yeah.
It's easier. All right. So back to here. So here's our upcoming schedule. I talk about him constantly. So next week I will be doing a tribute to Dean Wesley Smith and Kristen Catherine Rush, his wife. Um, I put him first because I've had a lot more interaction with him, but I learned from both of them. And I think that Dean probably would put Chris as the person he learns most from. So it really will be to both of them. The 10th, no session. I completely forgot that the Ann Arbor Duelist tournament is that weekend, and it's a 2-day tournament this year. So I am going to be way, way tied up on Sunday. Then we'll be hitting distance and scope in space a long way down to the chemist. Whose story is it anyway? Learning from improv. There are things we can learn and there are things we shouldn't. Panning for gold, the Bradbury method, a way to try to produce better fiction by producing more fiction. How, when, and why will be similar to this. It'll be on the topic of learning progression. And this one I have, most of what I've been teaching is stuff that I have taught before, much of it at FireCon. Hi, Dawn Ray. Hi, Jenna. How, when, and why is going to be entirely new, and it may be small, but I want to explore the topic because I talk about it a lot in other contexts. I want to gather those lessons into one place. Might be a short one. Then we have 4 weeks in a row on making story models and cover a lot of the book, maybe not all of it. October 12th, I've decided I want to add the tribute to Kevin J. Anderson and Rebecca Mesta, the founders of Superstars and judges of the Writers of the Future, and two really excellent people. And I want to introduce you to lessons I've learned from them. But after that, I sat down and looked at my schedule late last week and the list of things I had in my list of, I already know what I would say on this topic. And I've got another, let's see, I've got another 11 topics, and I've got roughly 20 topics right now that I actually am prepared to teach right now. And after that, well, I don't know what to do. Now, those of you who've been watching me and have been listening know that I'm always up for a challenge. I will pants anything, even the material to teach. Dawn, Ray, and Jenna are well familiar with the fact that when they say, hey, we need some classes for FireCon, I will just propose things at the drop of a hat and turn around and successfully teach them. We call this game FireCon Chicken, where I try to come up with the topics so outrageous that they will not let me teach it. And so far, I have yet to find one they will not let me teach. And pretty much every one of them succeeds in the end because I'm too stubborn to not do a good job after I proposed it. But I'm kind of at a point of running out of topics off the top of my head. And it occurred to me.
You weren't planning to teach.
It occurred to me that Dave Wolverton, aka David Farland, used to have, and I say used to in quotes because he kind of still does, even though we've lost him. He used to have Dave's Daily Tips. And before that, he had Dave's Daily Kicks, as in kicks in the pants, which is really just, he rebranded it as Daily Tips because somebody wanted him to be a little more formal, which was just a daily short essay on a writing topic. And it was a couple pages maybe. It was 500 words. It wasn't a big thing. But to do that day after day after day after day, eventually Dave started recycling them. I haven't actually counted them. I have an estimate that he may have had 2 years of daily tips. So he had a lot. But Dave eventually ran out of new things to say for the most part. I start to wonder if maybe before the year is out, I will run out of new things to say about writing. Maybe. I don't know. Again, I am up for the challenge. But this is why I sent out a survey that many of you saw saying, is there something specific you would like me to teach? And so far I got 3 responses to that survey. One, Cindy, a local writer from around Grand Rapids area, says she'd like a presentation on voice. So I'm putting notes together on how I can do that one. One, Trent, a past Writers of the Future winner, an absolutely deeply thoughtful guy. His blog or his Facebook posts are small multi-topic essays that tie all the topics into a theme. Just a deep thinker. Hit me with a challenge that I will have to decide if I can really do well. His topic, which I may have to broaden to turn it into a full discussion, was best science fiction story and why. And that's kind of a challenge because obviously I can only give you my personal opinions of best, but can there be lessons in why I think those are the best? So that's some pretty good ideas there. I'm open to more. And then I got a suggestion from Bex. And that led me to dredge up this. Now, I don't remember if I clicked the box so you got good video there or if you got crappy video. You might have got crappy video, which would be sad because it's so beautiful. But it's a video for a project I was working on a couple of years ago and never went anywhere because it was going to be a lot of work, a lot of fun, but a lot of work. The concept is called modeling the movies, where I take movies and create story models for them to demonstrate the modeling process. And I think this would be tons of fun. Also, way more work than I've put into any of these jazz sessions so far. But Bex wanted to see my modeling techniques applied to movies. And so what I may do is I may periodically do a modeling the movies session where I pull out a favorite movie and I make models of it. I have to decide, am I going to make the models ahead of time so they are smooth and polished, or am I going to make them live with you watching so that you can learn my modeling process? And I'm kind of inclined towards the latter. It'll be less polished, but I think more instructional. So that is one idea on the what should I teach. I really want to hear your suggestions of other things. But again, there may reach a point where it's like, this is all the lessons I have to teach now. And it's almost a year's worth. And I've helped you out with some levels. Maybe I may reach a point where I don't have something every week to present. So we'll see where we get there. In the meantime, of course, going back to paying for the soup, one more reminder, there's still time to get a pre-order on Uncle Roy's. Still can get making story models. Last questions.
Martin, I have a suggestion based on
Please.
the movies. Could you talk about trailblazing stories?
That defined new paths.
Yes.
I can think about that. The trick is, of course, a lot of my favorite movies, even if they're trailblazing, I didn't know it. Because in hindsight, everybody does that now.
But nobody knows what's going to be trailblazing until it's trailblazing. But talk about,
Exactly.
because I know that's one thing that comes up. I think it's Robert Sawyer particularly talking about people having not read some of the trailblazing stories in science fiction.
Yep. Yeah, Rob gets very, very, very passionate on this topic. I understand why he does. I also think, Rob, I'm old. You're old. These kids these days don't care. And I'm not sure they always have to care. And that's a heretical thing to say to Rob. But my point is that they are conversing in a world that has built so many layers on top of those foundational pieces that the foundational pieces are hidden and they're immersed in the modern pieces. So I see his point, and at the same time, I'm not sure that the new creators see his point or care. But I could certainly see going back and looking at some trailblazing foundational things that I still in my head think of as new movies, and it's like, yeah, they're new. They're only 50 years old. I was listening to a radio station as I was driving the other day. It was the radio station that I'm realizing driving and realizing I didn't know this because they've changed their call name. Not really their number or anything, but their call name has changed. But oh my word, this is the same station I was listening to in the 70s, and it's playing the same music I was listening to in the 70s. And it's a cliche that our music becomes oldies, but I stop and think, wait a minute. They're playing 50-year-old music. That would be like back in the 70s, me listening to a station playing music from the 20s. I'm old. That music is old. But is foundational for a lot of stuff that came. So I could put some thought in. I'm willing to hear suggestions of what you think are foundational that are worth discussing. I can do some research on that one. I definitely I am open to topics, and that is one I hadn't thought of. So I'll
Well,
put thought
I
in.
wrote an I wrote an essay on RUR, which I haven't put up yet. But in writing the essay, I learned a lot of really interesting things surrounding why that was written, including what the word robot actually means
Mm-hmm.
versus the word that originally was going to be used in the story.
Mm-hmm.
And it completely has changed my view on robots.
Mm-hmm.
And so I sometimes think about, and probably because I had a bigger background in foundational stories younger than most people did, because my high school had a class in pop lit by the decade. But I think it's really interesting to look at the evolution of this stuff and how
Mm-hmm.
it affects our current evolution of writing.
Yeah. And it surprises people sometimes because it's buried so deep they don't know it's there.
Right. And sometimes we don't even realize the influences on our modern things where we're like, oh, this is such a cool story. And it's like, yes, and it's totally based on this story, that's based on this story, that's based on this story.
Mm-hmm. And possibly, I hate to steal a whole topic from Dave, but possibly that might be a good thing to expand into the topic of resonance, as in his book, Drawing on the Power of Resonance in Writing. How those influences create power and opportunities in your own works. All right, you got me some things thinking to do there. So, but we'll look for other suggestions. Drop me a line if you've got any. Any last questions on our Dwarves in the Woods? I see a couple of things in the chat. Have we covered these already? Thought it was good. That was 522. That was a little ago. And Dawn Ray responding, yep. And then new. Well, looks like we are done with the questions. So any last bits? If not, then I will let you go. I will stop our sharing. Stop our recording.